Good afternoon. Welcome, everybody. I'm Edwin Karels, one of the many festival programmers. Thank you for coming on a Friday afternoon, sitting in semi-dark, which is excellent exercise for your eyes, because I assume you're interested in the Quay Brothers' latest stint. It's not a film, it's not an installation. What is it? It's a guided tour through an imaginary universe and a feature film still in the making. They're here because they created a new work, Dream Pools and Collecting Halls, which officially opens this evening at 6 in Tent in the Witt Street. I hope you go there, and it's going to be even darker than here, so that's the reason I mentioned your dimming of the eyesight. But once you get accustomed to the special atmosphere and lighting setup they did, it's a fantastic experience. They're also here with a 35mm film that can only be shown on 35. So on Saturday, we're showing their latest short film, The Doll's Breath. And that's accompanied by another film by a French artist, theater, and now filmmaker, Patricia Alliot, because we invited the Quay Brothers as part of our Frameworks scheme. And Frameworks is people with a reputation, asking them to go out of their comfort zone and create something special for the festival, but also to invite somebody we don't have on our radar, but that deserves to be on the radar of the film festival circuit. Patricia Alliot, she's also here. Welcome, Patricia. She made a beautiful film reconstruction of a hunting scene. So if you look in the program Hunting Scenes, The Doll's Breath, Patricia's film will be shown on Saturday. So much for practical things. Or informative films. And I'd like to give the microphone to Jeff Andrew, writer, teacher, programmer from London, one of the eminent voices of the Time Out magazine in London, who's going to do the interview with Quay Brothers. Welcome, Jeff. Welcome, Timothy. Stephen.
Yes, thank you for coming along this afternoon. The format, roughly, we'll be here for about 90 minutes, and I'll be asking quite a few questions because I've had the misfortune to know these people for some time and know their work, and so I've had time to think about trying to trip them up with some awkward questions. But there will be time for you to ask questions as well, and we'll also be showing some clips. And in fact, I think, obviously being here in Rotterdam, you know that Timothy and Stephen don't just make films because there is the exhibition on. But I think the brothers wanted to start with that, I presume, because it shows that you don't just make films, that you do live action and stop motion, but you also have worked in the theatre, opera, music videos, all sorts of stuff. And indeed are interested in art rather than just film, art generally. When did you, we often talk about music and other stuff as well, so obviously art is a big preoccupation. When did you first start getting so interested in art?
Just before we went to art school, we probably made a decision. I remember our father said, I'll back you up whichever way you want to go, whether it's you want to go do art or you want to do physical education, like teach, that kind of thing. And we just, at the last minute, we went for the Philadelphia College of Art, and that's how I think we started to really commit ourselves.
And I think you studied film and you studied illustration. Was that the case? Or?
No, it was a blurred case of mistaken identity between both of us.
So you were both doing a bit of both?
Well, yes, because on the weekends you'd rent a camera. You'd take a camera out, and of course we'd both work on the film together. So it just happened to be that I was sort of more. I was the one who could sign out the cameras.
And when was it that you actually decided, when did you first decide you wanted to make films in particular? And also, what was it about the medium that attracted you so much?
Well, I think that with the education that we had in graphics and drawing, that was the main formation. But then, of course, we'd seen a lot of animation films, so you sort of, the famous line by Paul Klee, "Take a line for a walk," seemed to be really instructive. And we'd seen some cutout animation films, and then we immediately thought that was viable. We like that sense where it was less drawing, but more on the graphic side, collage, and we'd seen some films by Lenica and Borowczyk, which were very pushed us in a certain direction.
Was that when you first became interested in Eastern European stuff?
I think because we were at the college, Philadelphia College, that there were two magazines that managed to filter into the place. One was Gebrauchsgrafik, and then one was Grafis. And that's when we suddenly saw the examples of poster art from, whether it be Czechoslovakia or Poland and Russia, but that in particular, I think it was the Polish that attracted us, because at the same time there was an exhibition at the Philadelphia College of classic Polish posters from the 50s and 60s. And what struck us was that it, unlike at the time what American posters were doing, the Polish poster was simply saying, it would say Wozzeck, Teatr Wielki, and Albenberg. That was it, three names. And that set us off into a kind of voyage into the constellations of all these potentials, what they suggested in music, what they suggested in opera, and even
Theater.
literature and theater.
Yeah.
And that was the primordial example.
And also, those posters have much more interested in form than the American posters, which are all about content.
I mean, the whole thing was that where in America there was a division of labor. They would say an illustrator cannot be a typographer. You hand it off to the next person. In Poland and say in most of the Eastern Bloc, it was the case of the artist was seminal. So if he did it by hand, the typography, if he did it by paint with his left hand, it worked.
So he did everything, basically.
Yeah.
Which you're still doing these days to some extent. How did the move to Europe, to London and Europe, come about, and why?
Well, we came to really compress a long story into a short story. We went back to America, but then we got fed up with doing. In the end, we had to do dishwashing and waitering, and it doesn't matter. But a Dutch friend of ours who was at the Royal College said, "Listen, guys, if you're washing dishes in Philadelphia, you can wash them in Amsterdam." And we thought that was such a great idea. So at that precise moment, we seemed to have gotten a grant. A national endowment grant of something like $10,000, and we just said, let's get out of here. We get out, and we told our mother we're going away for 2 weeks.
And we're still here.
Yeah, we're still here. But we landed in Amsterdam, and then we worked a bit, and then we moved to The Hague, but just before that, we left our producer in London, who Jeff knows very well, suggested that Keith Griffiths, that we leave some kind of a scenario for an experimental film. And we said, we don't do experimental films. We didn't even know what it meant. And so we said, we'll do something for puppets. He said, just do it. So we wrote something, and then we went to Amsterdam, and then 6 months later we got a message saying, you've got the money, now make your fucking puppet film.
And before we go on to our next clip, what is the thing about puppets that attracted you? Because seems to be central to so much of your work.
No, I think it was the idea that we felt that being brothers, that having a relationship that we have, that working on a small table with a couple of puppets was exactly the remedy, because I think we were a bit intimidated by the live action world, and we thought that the working with puppets would solve that problem, that nobody would be looking. You would have, and we'd learn the craft, stage by stage, building the puppets, learning how to light things, how to fail miserably, and then, but slowly build up your confidence. And I think that I mean, of course, it also was that when we were living in Amsterdam, we went down to Brussels to see we'd heard about the Tone Marionette Theater. And it was there that I think it was something that just, it clicked. It just said, this is the density that we wanted from what puppets could achieve. They seemed to represent emissaries from the beyond. And I think that was something that really attracted us. But we also had to learn to master the technical side of it. So it took a while.
But the great thing is that puppets can't talk back to you when you're directing them.
We said that. No, I think it's the difference between, it's the difference between working with live actors where you try to elicit a performance, and with puppets you do have to impose a performance. So it's the difference. But there's a clear difference there.
Twins reminded me last night that the last person who falls over by way of introduction doesn't say his name, which is Noel. So this was working with proper human actors. How was that after having not done that for so long?
Well, I think that Keith, our producer, said at one point after Street of Crocodiles, would you guys ever consider making a live-action film? And we said, no, never. But then we were reading Jacob van Guten at the time, and we said, well, if we could keep it as a chamber play, very intimate with a handful of actors, that we might be, we would try it. And then it just, suddenly things started happening, and there was money. The Germans came on board, the Japanese came on board, British Screen and Channel 4. So it was done for £1 million at that time, and it was a minimal budget. And
I was just going to say that, but that was 1995, but almost 21 years before, we first started reading Robert Walser, and it was from a Times Literary Supplement. Times Literary Supplement?
yeah.
It's an article written by Christopher Middleton. And he said, and the headline was Portrait of a Nobody, and we looked at each other and we said, that's for us. And it was Robert Walser, and it was the first translations of Robert Walser into English. And so 21 years later, unbeknownst, we were able to make this film.
And you created this little Middle European place in Hampton Court.
No man's land.
I remember coming down on the set, and also some of it in your studio. And actually, most of your films, it seems to me, are in many ways primarily about creating worlds, creating cosmoses or universes. Would you is that how you see it? Because you are creating things that don't actually exist.
No, I think that every film you start out with this sort of, it's the idea of the scenography as a poetic vessel. So in Steuben Dementor, the thing that most attracted us was that the institute itself, the school, and that we gave it a sort of
History.
a prehistory, that it was originally was a perfume factory, and that the man who had this perfume factory had in the attic, in the top floor, a tiny museum because which was devoted to the deer, the elements of the deer, and because perfume, the essential element is musk, which comes from the deer, and it's as though this person who had the museum created all the footnotes, all the marginality around the kingdom of the deer. And it also was very much that, in a way, Walser worked very powerfully with the fairy tale elements, and the kingdom of animals is very much a part of fairy tale lore, folklore. And so we created this huge, hopefully, spell that the people who were in the school, between either the brother and sister who ran the school, were hugely contaminated by all this animal kingdom lore. And of course, it was a little bit like Lisa was the Sleeping Beauty, Herr Dementor was the ogre, and Jakob van Guten was the princeling who arrives from, from nowhere, from out of the forest, arrives not with the kiss of life, but ultimately with the kiss of death. So that was what we were trying to perpetrate.
Yeah, I mean, there were even, I think there were seven
dwarves.
Pupils, so it's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs.
Of course, the 7 dwarves were the students, exactly.
And you actually did do a proper sort of script for this film with Alan Passes, and it was an adaptation. Did you actually stick closely to that script? Because I know sometimes you don't. You sort of have a script and then you sort of more or less throw it away and let the film develop as you shoot it.
No, with the feature films, we've always, partially as a challenge, but we've always, we've written very detailed scripts with detailed lighting, for the lighting cameraman. Everything was really powerfully there on the page. With the animation films, they're much more intelligent bluffs that you throw to the commissioning, whether it's Channel 4, the BFI, even to the producer, and even to our producer. Exactly. Because in a sense, it's a little bit that a feature film, this one was shot in 30 days. So you knew you had you had to be really focused, and we can be really disciplined like that. But with the animation films, you realize it's going to take a year and a half, 2 years. They give up following you after a while. They forget, and that's great. So 2 years later, we wave and say the film's finished, and that's. But it's very much where the studio becomes a kind of laboratory. So you have there's a huge chance to explore what you've actually not only put on the page, but what you haven't put on the page. And in a sense where, for instance, if you say, it's like in a script, you can't say the music will solve it here, or that we're animating to music here. They wouldn't believe you. They wouldn't buy that. But for us, the music is a secret scenario. So we always tend to have the music first, and then we elaborate the script within the realm of the what the composer has established. And yeah.
Yeah. Well, we'll come back to music later because there's a particular clip that sort of draws that out. But it's interesting in watching this film again recently. You have a bit of voiceover for Jacob, the Mark Rylance character, but you also have the shots of Lisa dreaming, and it's very ambiguous about whose story this really is in the film. Who is dreaming it or who is experiencing it? And in fact, like many of your films, there's this idea, well, is it dream or is it reality? And that line is very, very blurred and things keep flipping over.
Well, I know, Walser spoke powerfully of this Zwischenwelt, this half-between world, where you couldn't quite recognize either up or down or before or after.
Or dreaming and sleep.
Non-dreaming, yeah.
No, I think that in a way with the Institute Ben Dementor was that you weren't quite sure whether it was the Institute itself that was perpetrating the dream upon the characters, or was it Lisa, or was it Jakob, or the confusion. So I think those floating worlds appeal to us, clearly, and I think Walser's work courts that beautifully.
I think it was also because it was a quote by Rilke that said that the people in the Institute were assigned a disease, and therefore they died. So in a way, the Institute Ben Dementor was one of those victims.
Of course, I personally think it's Noel's story throughout, but that's another thing. Before we move on to the next clip, I want to talk about sound. I mean, it seems particularly important not only in this film but in all your films, because quite often, I mean, here of course you have dialogue, but sound is very much about creating this world, and we never really see the outside of the Institute apart from at the very beginning when he comes to the door. But we're very aware of things outside. Do you spend a lot of time thinking about, forget music for now, but about sound?
I mean, you're talking about Ben Dementor.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing is that, as you said, we shot outside London at Hampton Court, and of course that's on the flight path of Heathrow. So every other minute, the planes were flying over the top, and we'd be constantly saying, "Wait, I'm going to pass." We go, but there was the buzz of lights, the hum of just the atmosphere, and so in the end, Larry Sider, our sound person, said, "Listen, we just scrap everything and we start anew." And we re-recorded all the sound. All the actors were totally freaked out by having to redo their voices, but they fell into it at the end. And so every sound was recreated.
And I think what it did in the end was create this
Intimacy.
beautiful intimacy, because the sounds, they're very subtle. So it doesn't feel like a normal sound film.
And talking about getting the actors to have to do that, I mean, how did you direct the actors? Because it wasn't something you'd had to do before. You were having not to impose, but to elicit.
No, I mean, I remember that when we had we asked a choreographer friend, Kim Brandstrup, to come on board to help us with the students, and we sort of said to Kim, "Listen, take these 7 dwarves and work with them on certain themes." So we gave certain themes about folding napkins, maybe how to handle a fork, a lot of little bizarre themes. And of course, the students contributed hugely to the invention. So at the end of the day, we'd go in and we'd see this and that, and then Timothy and I would say, we're going to pull this scene out, we're going to pull that one out. And that was the way we worked with the students. So they contributed hugely, and we chose every one of the students because we said we didn't want English actors. We wanted all the foreigners to drift in. So there was a Dane, the Sicilian, they were all different, and it was fantastic, their contribution like that. But as we said, it was an international school for servants. Where was I going?
Well, you were talking about the directing servants and.
But I know with say somebody like Gottfried, you really didn't have to overly coax him. He knew the role right away, like that. Whereas Alice was constantly, we'd sit with her every night and run through things, the script, and then talk about the ways she might do it. So we were very attentive to eliciting that performance, because I think because we didn't know, we didn't have the experience, but what we did have is a certain instinct for what was right and what we wanted from the film. So she was very, we'd mark the camera frame, and they had to choreograph themselves that they had to hit a point, and that they were locked off frames, and that the choreography was very important for that.
And then you had Mark Rylance, whose face in that
I know.
is just extraordinary, and it is throughout the film. It's expressive as Keaton or something. But
Well, we said that was the one thing we said to Mark when he came on board. We said, Buster Keaton, if you can get anywhere close, that the face as a mask, is crucial.
in the eyes, really.
And yes, exactly.
Actually, I should explain that it was Stephen and Timothy who chose these clips. It wasn't me, although I sort of tried to make sense of their instructions. When they were talking about plot and characters, I had no idea who they were talking about, but we got there in the end. Why did you choose this clip?
Well, it's the denouement of the entire piece. I think had to come to an end. But also, it will be repeated. He'll go right back in again. And he'll discover things that he hadn't seen, which we still have to film yet.
I mean, it's Schultz, and indeed, of course, your new film is inspired by a Schultz novel, Sanatorium Under the Sign of the Hourglass, and that in itself is what the exhibition is about as well. So, what is the great appeal of Schultz for you?
Well, I mean, it was interesting that when we applied to the British Film Institute to do a second film, they felt that our sense of narrative was so wayward and so useless that they said, "Oh, you have to base it on a piece of literature." So we said, okay, Bruno Schultz, who is, as we laughed to ourselves, the least narrative writer imaginable, and they said, "Great, fine, this is great." So we thought, whew.
I should say that as somebody who's worked at the BFI, it is one of the most illiterate places imaginable. I believe this.
No, but I think that we'd been to. By then, we'd traveled to Poland, and maybe to pick up on an earlier thing when you said about the fascination with Eastern Europe. The thing that we, even in our early years in Philadelphia, we'd seen a lot of Eastern European animation, and I think that what we realized that what Eastern Europe was able to do was a highly metaphoric universe where they obviously fronted one story to present a coded second story. So there was a lot of deeper elements within it. And I think having been raised and force-fed on Disney as kids all our life, it was a welcome change, and also just the sophistication of and the quality of the animation and the poetry. So that when we came to our travels to Poland, we had a very dear friend, Andrzej Klimowski, who introduced us and said, "I think you should read Schultz." We'd read Kafka, and he said, "This is sort of in that territory, but it's Polish." And there's only 2 volumes of his work that exist, short stories, but the first volume, fascinated us was The Street of Crocodiles, the story, although we brought in many of the themes from all the short stories like that. But there was the element of, there was something in Schultz that there was this, what he called the poetic ascendancy of the everyday, and that matter wasn't dead, that it was constant fermentation, in flight and movement, and it was these elements that, and talking about mannequins, dummies, that, he gave such a depth and a range to the material that we felt that this was something to step up to in a more metaphoric language and a more metaphysical language that he dealt with. So that's the script was fairly detailed, but so much was discovered as we actually filmed, which is pretty much the way we always work.
I mean, in a way, that sort of writing where objects take on a life and the environment has a life just as much as any of the characters, that's perfect material for puppet animators, really, because that's what you're doing. You're giving life to screws and to string and as well as the puppets.
It's a total animistic sideshow in a way. It's complete freeing up that kind of universe where these objects become sort of transitional narrative elements that you can tell so much of the story through without. We don't work with, our puppets don't speak ever, so it's the mask that speaks. That's just part of our language.
And I mean, as you've alluded to, the narrative is not your main concern. I mean, obviously there's texture and form and shape and whatever, and mood. But have you had problems with people saying, well, hang on, we don't understand this. You said it was going to be based on this story, and look what, this is incomprehensible. Has that caused problems ever?
I think totally. But I think for us that the scenography is the most powerful in terms of the objects, what they symbolize, what they can potentially symbolize, becomes the secret scenario, plus along with the music. But we always say that the films follow musical laws rather than dramaturgical laws, and I think that's where we place the depth of the animation and the conception.
Yeah.
And also because you realize too that with, say, anybody who goes to the ballet never sits there and says, oh, where's the narrative on that one?
Or where's the dialogue?
And
why aren't they speaking?
They accept the language of dance as something that you have to work at. And the same with our film. They're not difficult. And actually, we're convinced we're pretty narrative. So,
yeah, I'm persuaded. There was narrative there. It's based on somebody called Emma Hauck, who wrote letters from an asylum in which she'd been institutionalized to, I think, her husband.
To her husband.
And the letters are fairly illegible, and so there is a narrative there, albeit a small one, which you develop according to objects and moods, but also according to sounds. And the music was by Karl-Heinz Stockhausen. Now, sometimes you've had music specifically written for your films, as particularly like Jankowski, but often you've enjoyed taking existing music. Could you talk about how that works, and also particularly how it worked with Stockhausen here?
Well, this was a BBC program where they took the bull by the horns by saying, rather than saying like Hollywood does, we do the music afterwards, they said, we'll do the music first, and we'll bring the directors on afterwards. So there was...
They commissioned.
That was the commission.
So
they commissioned the composers first. So there was Louis Andriessen, who was given to Hal Hartley. Sir John Tavener was given to Werner Herzog. Nicholas Roeg was given somebody else, but he chose Portishead. And we were offered Stockhausen after we were told that 10 people refused him, directors. So we leapt for it. But in that sense, we thought it was, it fell into our hands because we always have the music first. So.
And he was rather happy when he saw the results, when he saw your film, yes?
Well, first we had to, the BBC said we had to send him a show reel to be approved by him. And he said, they're okay. And then we could begin. But then after we filmed the first, say, 10 minutes, he came to London to look at what we were doing. And he saw the first 10 minutes, and at the end he said, guys, I think maybe just a little bit of blue somewhere in the middle. We sort of said, okay. So he was he let it go at that. But what was interesting was in the end when we had to go to Cologne to show him the final piece, and part of the deal was the BBC film crew came with us because they wanted to talk to Stockhausen after the film, and so like when the lights go up, you know, the BBC crew are right here in the foreground filming Karl-Heinz to get that reaction. You know, we thought like this is mad, and so Timothy and I are sitting at the back,
Ready to run.
And the lights go up, and you can see the BBC crew filming. And suddenly, because Stockhausen has 2 wives, so on both sides of him, they stand up and they flag the film crew down from filming. And we thought, uh-oh. And what happened was that he was overcome. But he was overcome because he thought that we knew that his mother had been gassed by the Nazis, and that we had intuited that this was a portrait of his mother, because you only see, in the film, you only ever see her from behind. So he thought that we knew something.
They were telepathic.
Telepathic. Mm-hmm. And that was the word he used, telepathic. And we didn't know about this detail. After he composed himself, he then went on to talk for an hour to the BBC film crew, very eloquently, very calmly, and you know he was quite remarkable in that sense, very lucid. And
one of the things I love about this film, and so many of them, is that you get an extraordinary sense of scale in your films. So sometimes you're dealing with little pencil points and things, but at the same time you feel that this room she's in is almost as big as a cosmos in itself. It feels infinitely imprisoning in a way. And is scale something that concerns you a great deal? Because you sort of go from very small to very large, even though you're working often with very small things.
Well, I remember that there was a beautiful quote by Leonora Carrington where she said that one eye should be plunged into the microscope and the other into the stratosphere, telescope, like that. And I think that always has made a strong impression about, you know, the sense of ratio between, you know, macro close-ups and sometimes your wide shots or your long shots. The interesting thing is that the landscapes in the film were done incredibly small and very miniature, like that. But of course, once it goes to 35 millimeter film and the big screen, nobody has any sense of what our scale is, what size the objects are, or whatever. And I think that's where, that's in a way our power, you know, our ability to know that what you can achieve at the microscopic level or whatever. Or where the confusion works to advantage. Yeah.
Mm. It's another reason why you should go to the exhibition at Tent, because you can see how big certain things are.
Yeah. I think inside the potentiality of all these drawers of becoming areas where not only we would attempt to look for the marginal next project or whatever, but that it was something parallel or akin to that.
Yeah, I mean, watching it again, it just feels not exactly autobiographical, but so relevant to what you do.
It's like a giant bibliothèque. I mean, all these drawers, you need ladders and ladders upon ladders to discover, and there's not enough time. Mm. But you make do with what is at, the height of your reach.
Yeah, I mean, also watching these clips, as always, one is reminded that you keep coming back to certain things in your films. I mean, there is even, I think, a sort of telescope in the hourglass at the sanatorium under the sign of the hourglass at one point. And it's you keep having bits of string and sort of optical devices and screws and dust and whatever. Partly, I should imagine that's about recycling, given that you have your collection of things that you use to put in your films, but they must mean things to you. Do you have sort of fetish objects that you really like using in your films?
Well, clearly, no. I think, ultimately, you're trying to find another. You're trying to advance at one or something. So you're trying to elaborate it in a different context.
Yeah, but on the other hand, nobody blames Scorsese for using De Niro 20 times.
I'm not blaming you. I'm actually thanking you. That's why we keep watching the films. I want to see those screws and string a bit more. But no, I'm not. I just think. Do you think? Oh, I loved using this particular thing in movies.
True.
No, but on the other hand, I think that I don't think that we, that you. I don't want to be defensive or something, but in a sense, you try hard not to repeat. You try to, if you do, it's like I said earlier, you're trying to augment a metaphor or a parallel, and I think that's valid. But without being too specific, we don't have to make a litany of things. But no, I think you're always trying to find another channel, another language to push a kind of Cortázar spoke about a secret order, sort of less communicable, but in a sense where, we're not obeying the laws of reality. We're looking for those exceptions like that. And that's the sort of, I think that's ultimately what's in the back of your mind when you're working like in the studio.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, I'm not saying one shouldn't repeat and do, I mean, look at Bach or Mirror or Ozu.
Yes.
So, there's a lot of good people doing it.
Yeah.
That was taken from a Stanislav Lem story about a character who is torn between her love and her destiny as a killer, I suppose. You actually had voiceover in that one, so you made it a bit easier for the audience. But why did you choose this particular clip?
No, it was a commission from the Polish Cultural Institute. They were doing a traveling exhibition of Stanisław Lem in England, and then it never happened. But the film stayed commissioned, and they said, you must choose one of his famous robot stories. There were 10, I think. And in the volume that we had, there were 2 extra stories, which we presume were part of the robot stories, but apparently they weren't. So we chose Maska, which is this one, but they were fine. The Institute was fine with it, so we did that one. Mm. But I think that it was, again, it was this notion of poetic science fiction that really attracted us.
Well, it's again myth, fairy tale.
Yeah,
that
exactly.
I do want to, before we go to the audience, I do want to talk to you about The Doll's Breath briefly, because you do have an opportunity to see it, and I do urge you to. It was actually the best film I saw all last year. So I think it's tremendous. Even this best 22 minutes I spent watching a film last year. And it's based on some writing by Felisberto Hernandez, an Argentinian writer that
Uruguayan.
Sorry, that I'd never heard of course. I did read the story before seeing the film, which didn't help me at all when I watched the film. I still had no idea what was going on really, but it was absolutely wonderful. Can you just talk a little bit about how you came to make that film? And
well, the longer story is that we had traveled with, and that we were trying to get. I'll start again. In New York, our production company, Zeitgeist, who distributes our films, wanted to do a Blu-ray, and they didn't. They ran out of money, I think, and because Christopher Nolan has his first film with Zeitgeist, and he knows the people very well. He offered to make brand new 35mm prints of all the 35mm films that we've done. And then it was made into a traveling show, which Christopher became a part of, and we were in New York together. And on the strength of that, we got up the nerve to ask Christopher, would he, in name only, help with the sanatorium project, which is now at the tent. And he deliberated for a while, and then he said, since you've begun the film digitally, and you know my feelings about digital films, he said, I'm going to offer you, you can make a new project on condition that it's in 35mm and not longer than 30 minutes. So you go for it. So in a sense, that's what this project came from, was his commission, and just saying, yeah, a good producer.
and he wasn't bothered about what you filmed as long as it was on 35.
No, we made a very detailed scenario. He questioned it at one point, basically saying, I didn't understand a thing. But he says, but then I understand that you're a visualist, so I trust you. So.
And how was it working on 35 again after some time?
After 15, almost 20 years, yeah. No, we had two 35mm cameras in our studio, and we were using them as glorified doorstops. So we just resurrected one of them, and funny how the fingers remember how to thread a camera. So it was. The odd thing was, ultimately, in the end, there we were loading the film every day and unloading the film, but all the files came back as digital files. So you didn't touch the film after that. That felt strange, very strange.
Okay, then we do have microphones, so please put up your hand and somebody will bring your mic. Yes, there's somebody here.
Hello, it's Kuriko from Japan, movie website eiga.com. Actually, I have two quick questions. First is about your creation of masks and puppets. Your puppets has often no eyes, and I'm wondering if you have any inspiration from the Japanese masks, because we have even the traditional theater form called no, using masks. So do you have any, did you get any inspiration from that? And the second question is that in Japan, we often says the puppets have spirit. So if you treat them badly, they will revenge you. Do you believe in such a kind of mysticism? Thank you.
No, of course we know about the No Theater and the Bunraku Theater. I don't think we were thinking about that, but I mean, And there's only one film where the puppets don't have eyes, and that's in Crocodiles. So, and that was meant to be more symbolic, that they were more like robots rather than humans, or well, human-like. What was the other question? Oh, spirit, yes. Well, that's why the new film is called The Doll's Breath. We do believe in the breath of the doll. Yes, yes, yes.
Anybody else got a question? I'm sure somebody must. Even, what does this film mean? Yes, over here.
Hello, and I have a question about the editing. And it seems to be that it's very important for you also, next to the building the puppets, also the editing. How much time do you need for the editing, and how important is it for you to create the story?
Well, the montage is done simultaneously. We make the montage on the same day. So if it doesn't work with the music, then you reshoot or you rethink. But it's always done in correlation with the music, because the music is always the bed, so to speak.
And you're editing on the computer or on the...
Well, you have to.
I mean, when we were shooting 35, we had a Steambeck, so we edited on the Steambeck. Now you edit on, what is it? After Effects or Final Cut Pro.
With the music, I mean, you decide very early on which music you're going to be using, and then do you just sort of have it playing while you're filming, and then edit to the music as well? I mean, can you?
No, I think once you've made a major choice, it's you play it again and again and again. You take it into your system completely. Like in the new one, The Doll's Breath, it's 20 minutes of music. The same with Stockhausen. It was, 20 minutes of pure music. So it's both a challenge, but it's also finding that that contamination between image and music, and where it's working and where it's challenging you to find the language that will approximate that music. And in a way, you might have something written in the scenario, but you go, it's wrong. It's not going to work here. So you're constantly working day by day. It's very organic, the process, and you talk a lot. We sit and talk every night about where we think it's at that point, the film.
And when you've done music promos, that's obviously slightly different, because they're commissioning you. They're saying, this is our choice of music. I mean, how does that work for you?
Well, it's a way. It's like you're working with your left hand. It's.
No, you can be serious about working with your left hand. Yes. I mean, pop videos, it's a divergence. It's like doing, on that first clip, it's like doing all the commercials. We realized that, if we were going to survive being filmmakers, that to do one commercial a year, which takes 6 weeks, we'd have another 46 weeks totally free to do what we wanted. So, and that was the payoff. You got a lot of money for doing something stupid, but you could also do it elegantly. Without compromising yourself.
Some very great filmmakers have made commercials. So, even Ingmar Bergman made commercials.
That's right.
For
Yes.
toothpaste.
Yeah.
And that's how Godard found Anna Karina, through a soap commercial.
Yeah. Yes.
I remember that a good while ago, your names suddenly popped up in the music business, in that you were defended by Kurt Cobain, of all people, because he felt that some of the early Tool videos were rip-offs of what you did. So I was wondering, did you speak to Adam Jones, the guitar player of Tool, who made those videos at all? And do you even care that people rip your work off?
No, we didn't. We didn't know about that. I mean, we somebody did tell us finally, but you know, I don't think we're great. Yeah.
Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery.
Yeah, exactly.
Or theft.
No, I don't. Well, I think sometimes what you object to is, say, on YouTube, when they take your film and they put another music on, and then they try to sell their CD off your back. We find that a bit insulting, and that seems to be pretty common. People doing that, so that sort of gets up your nose.
Yes. Down here.
Hi, you're worked a lot with books, adapting books. So, speaking about Balzer and the Institut Benjamin and all the other films you've done that come from books, could you speak a little bit more about that process, making a book, a film, and how do you live through it? How do you choose what you stuff?
I think that ultimately you're looking. If you read, say, something of Walser or say Felisberto Hernandez or say Stanislaw Lem, you immediately say there's the text, but you have to create the imagistic realm, which is the parallel realm that you want to be really independent of the text. In Mask, we used a bit of the text because it was so beautiful. But then the same with Walser. But sometimes with the Felisberto, there's been no text at all. It's just a parallel visual realm. But no, I mean, we read, and you know, there's some things that you say are very imagistic, and you think that you can thread images through it. Other times you say that's pure literature, and it stays as literature. You don't touch it.
Somebody else had their hand up just there.
Hey, also about Robert Walser. In the novel, the characters, they are like teenagers, right? But in your adaptation of Jacob von Gunthen, I noticed that you deliberately made the characters look older. You know, why is that?
I mean, why not? I mean, I think there needs to be a little depth in the character, and then they have to be a little scarred in life to come to the Institute, because if you want to become a zero in life, you're not a young person who would believe in that.
We speak from experience. Anybody else got a question? Because we've still got a few minutes left. Well, I've just got a couple. Did somebody put their hand up?
Yeah.
Ah, okay, yeah. Wait for the microphone.
Thanks. Jeff asked a question about objects and images coming round and round in your films. And of course, you know, unlike most filmmakers, you actually have a stock of things, of objects, which, you know, presumably you keep in drawers, like in the cabinet of Dr. Schwankmeyer. But I wonder how much these objects that you keep actually dictate their own terms to you. You know, if you've used a mirror or a rusty screw or a lens or something, or a doll or part of a doll, do these things require to be used again? Do you find there's an object which is insisting that you find a way to use it, either for the first time or multiple times?
No, I think every object also has its memory. And either you bring that to the fore, or you say you exclude that memory, and you give it a new memory, or a new potential for that, for another memory.
I think it's like you're also, like, we tend to scour the flea markets, and you know, sometimes you're looking for something in particular. most of the time, that never works because you never find it. What happens usually is that you wander upon something you didn't expect, and you see sometimes the way the person who has his stall in the market, he's arranged certain things, his objects, his wares, in a certain pattern that, or you don't know if he's doing it artistically or unconsciously, or what. But we'll wander onto this little display, and we both instinctively will look at each other, and we know exactly the object. Something's kicking, something's reverberating, and we'll usually buy that thing plus the thing next to it on either side of it
to make it cheaper.
But in a sense, what you're seeing, what we like is that randomness, or that sense of the chance encounter, where you find that one little element of, I mean, you could say it's surrealist poetry, you could call it what you want, but it's that something, you hear that sort of knocking deep inside the object that you think this has potential. And we tend to take it back to the studio, and we sort of put it somewhere. We sort of have an area where we put objects, but a lot of times we don't use it for that film, and it might not come up until 2 or 3 films later, and it seems right. So there's no logic. Sometimes, clearly we will maybe have reused something, but I like to think we always do it under a different atmosphere, or barometric pressure is different for that scene.
There's a couple of things I want to ask before we tie up. One is, I mean, we've spoken about all the drawers, and I'm not thinking of objects in them, but ideas and moods and projects, maybe. Is there one drawer, one project still that you haven't gone up that ladder yet and you'd really like to do? I mean, obviously there's Hourglass Sanatorium, but something else. Is there anything else that you have a burning ambition that you would love to do?
No, because I think that the Sanatorium project has been something that's been going on since really Street of Crocodiles. So it's been a long, long project, and it's it's gone through many manifestations, the script, but you feel like it has to be now. This is the one. And we started, before the Christopher Nolan project, we started filming it. We filmed about 25 minutes of the material already. So it's a project that you're deeply locked into, so that one has to be acquitted before we can even think of. I mean, of course, a project might come out of the blue, and if we like it, we'd probably, we might do it, but it just depends.
And finally, I mean, you sort of said you go and see these objects, and you immediately kicks for both of you. You've been working now together for half a century. Do you ever disagree? And if so, when that happens, how do you resolve it?
No, we don't. If we disagree between, saying, using a 50mm lens or a 105, that's not an issue. We can shoot it in both ways, and then we decide afterwards.
In the editing, Christian. Yeah. No, and also it's like you put the bottle of wine on the table, 2 glasses, and you work it out. You talk it out, and you realize you're making one film, not 2 films, and it's for the good of the film, not the good of our ego or one of our egos like that. It's you get over it.
Yeah. Okay, well, sadly, it's exactly 4:00, so we do have to type. But before you thank Timothy and Stephen, please, I do urge you to go and see The Doll's Breath and indeed the exhibition, because fabulous stuff. Thank you very much, and thank you, Stephen and Timothy.